Hello, I'm Steve Barg, City Administrator for the City of Marshfield, and welcome to the post-council meeting news conference. We hold these after every meeting of the council. Today is the recap of the meeting on Tuesday, May 11th. And as always, I'm pleased to have with me Mike Warren from WDLB, who will be leading us off here.
All right, thank you, Steve. It wasn't that active a meeting. There were a couple big items on the agenda from that meeting. And the one real big, I guess, headline, I guess if you're living in the city of Marshfield, you hear city subdivision proposal, and that may raise some eyebrows or get the attention of some. So this is a road, I guess the city hasn't really been down for a while. So maybe just kind of take us through this new proposal that the council heard about on Tuesday, city subdivision proposal, kind of how it would work and kind of where the council left it at after their discussion at the meeting on Tuesday.
Sure, Mike. I'll begin by saying our Public Works Department will not be out there building homes. If you're looking for the city staff to be constructing, that won't be occurring. So, but what we're talking about is the fact that we need more housing opportunities in the city of Marshfield. And, a lot of times people think of economic development as land in the industrial park and those kind of things, but it's a lot more than that. It's where will the employees of these companies that we're trying to get to come here and stay here, where will they live? And, they have different incomes, they have different needs, different family situations. So we want options for people. Well, a couple of years ago, if you remember, maybe going back 6 or 7 years actually, multifamily was the biggest need. We were getting hit on by the fact that we needed more rental opportunities. And we did work with the local building community, and we were actually able to help spur on some development of hundreds of new rental units that have been built over by Walmart, over by the high school, down off former Highway 10, Heritage Drive. So, I think we've made a lot of headway in terms of filling that need for rental housing. But now the biggest thing seems to be we just don't have enough single-family lots. And, we get criticized from time to time by the fact that a lot of people want to build here in Marshfield, but they end up building in one of the surrounding towns because there just isn't what they want here. So what we're trying to do is kind of spur on some new development. Now, this was proposed once about 5 years ago, I think, when Jason Angel was the Development Services Director. It didn't take off at that time. But the idea is this, Mike. Developers are running on kind of a thin margin. And, we're not Dane County, and we're not a suburb of Milwaukee, so the build-out doesn't occur that fast here. But there's a demand. We have people who want to buy and build here. So for the developer to buy land and to put sewer, water, street, storm sewer on it, and then wait for it to build out over a period of 10, 15, 20 years, they're hesitant to do that. They're hesitant to take on that debt given the timeline involved. So what we're trying to do here is have the city acquire the land and put in the infrastructure and then work with the developers to get these homes built. It'll be good for us for tax base. We believe we'll recoup our investment in the taxes that are paid on these homes. And I think from what Development Services Director Josh Miller is saying, there's a demand. He's already hearing interest in pre-sales of these lots. So it's not like, build it and they will come. There's real opportunity here. And so we're proposing to take the lead. And I know that doesn't sound normal to people. Typically, government usually sits aside and lets the market handle something until the market can't. Well, in this case, we're just kind of trying to jumpstart the private market a little bit.
All right, so kind of give us maybe the nuts and bolts of this program. I know it sounded during the presentation at the council meeting, it sounded like a real aggressive timeline. They want to get shovels in the ground this year yet, yeah. I think. And so maybe just kind of could you take us through how this would work? The city does this, and then a contractor does this, and then a homeowner, or what? And take us through the various steps and who would be doing what as this kind of would progress into a new subdivision for the city.
Yeah, well, Mike, the first thing is that we want to look at trying to get something going yet this year. It's important. That's why you heard the urgency from Josh last night, is that we want to be able to have, by the end of fall, have infrastructure in the ground and have lots available for development. So the city's main portion, of course, is acquiring the land, and we are looking at somebody to buy from. We're not talking about it, obviously, until something can be released. This would be for 20-plus lots, which is a decent size. I think the one we looked at 5 years ago was smaller than that. And so the city would buy the property, we put the infrastructure in, the estimated cost of the infrastructure and some of the related fees, the land and everything, about $1.5 million, as I look at Josh's memo. And the city has a group called the Economic Development Board. Now, they're part of the city. They're not independent from the city, but they do manage a fund called the Economic Development Fund that started from an old revolving loan fund. And they have about $1.3 million in that fund. So we talked about the idea that maybe a lot of that could be used to put toward this with the idea that there's a return on investment. We're going to get money paid back, and some of that can come back into the Economic Development Fund. But I think one of the things that one of the council members picked up on last night is that they thought, well, $900,000, that's 2/3 of the fund balance, almost 3/4. Why would we do that? But if you look at the chart that Josh has put together, having this go-ahead by the council allows him to talk to Wood County, to talk to Marshfield Utilities, to talk to wastewater utility, to people that we haven't really talked to before, who were very much willing to contribute last time when we did this and didn't get to the finish line. And they're likely to contribute monies as well, because they're gonna see payback. Utilities is gonna see more customers. Wood County is gonna see more tax base. So we're gonna see contributions that reduce that. But going back to where you were before, Josh is gonna work on actually trying to pre-sell lots and working with developers. And we want are covenants that have some baseline in terms of what we expect. We don't want somebody to put up a pole shed and call it a house. And, but then working with interested, companies that are willing to meet those covenants, are willing to build in those price ranges, and would like to buy and build homes for people on those sites. So there's a baton being handed off somewhere in the middle, but we are the driving force. We're normally in a typical subdivision, we wouldn't be the lead player.
All right, so the city puts in all the infrastructure, then sells the lots to who?
To a builder, well.
A developer, okay.
Yeah, right, but there's gotta be a commitment, and I only picked up some of the presentation last night myself, coming back from vacation, but
Okay.
the idea of pre-selling so that you got a pretty good idea, homes are gonna be built on those properties. It's not put a subdivision in and they will come. That's a key point of this. But we'll be working, presumably with multiple builders, people who want to buy lots and build on them, and we're trying to pre-sell them. Based on the proposed city subdivision, the way it is right now, we believe the average lot could be sold for about $40,000 to $50,000, which we think is doable. Again, the developers struggle to put in all the infrastructure plus the land cost and be able to do that. So we're hoping this will make it affordable. And once we have the commitment for the pre-sale, we'll acquire the property, start construction on the infrastructure, and that we would propose selling the remaining lots that we don't pre-sell, over time, working with a professional realtor if needed.
These sound like higher-end homes. I think the average assessed value would be $400,000. And we heard from a realtor who said, basically, this is the need in the city of Marshfield right now.
It is, and here's one of the difficult things. I mean, I think you heard that from Ashley Frederick last night, one of the local realtors. The housing study we did a few years ago really made a big point of saying we need affordable housing. We need housing in that $150,000 to $200,000 range for people who maybe first-time home buyers or whatever, they're getting into their careers. The problem is you really can't build homes for those prices anymore. In fact, Ashley, her husband was here last night and said building something under $300,000 is pretty hard these days. So where people are still thinking that $150,000 to $200,000, they need to get acclimated to the fact that whatever affordable housing is, and that's not very clearly defined, it's more expensive than that. No, it just is. So when you talk about $300,000 to $400,000, people are picturing, mansions and stuff, but really it's the higher end, but it's where the realtors are telling us the largest demand is right now for single-family housing.
And she made an interesting point that I had not thought of. As people buy those homes and develop them, they move out of, maybe they're upgrading, right?
True.
So they move out of a home that somebody maybe in the lower middle, economic range, they want to move up. And so now they'll buy the home just vacated by the family or couple that just bought the brand new house. And there's sort of this domino effect, this chain reaction all the way down. And you kind of create housing at all levels by building brand new homes at the top end of it.
Yeah, you're right, Mike. If you're gonna be a healthy community, you really need to have what I call life cycle housing, which means, do you have something for the 20-something buying that first home? Do you have something for the people who are now having kids and they need a bigger house? How about when you're building your career? And then on the other end, what about when you're an empty nester? What about when you're downsizing? You want to have housing for all those different types of groups that would be appealing to them. And that's not very easy to do. That's pretty challenging because, that's a wide range and a wide mix of home opportunities. But you're right. If people are building a $350,000 or $400,000 house, if they're residents, they're leaving a home that probably is smaller and less expensive, freeing that up for another family, maybe looking for that type of alternative. We still want to have housing for people who can't afford that, but the idea that we're going to see people building homes for $150,000 is just not realistic anymore. So I think the model needs to be looked at a little bit.
And so the city's share outside of EDB would be 622,000.
That's the estimate, yes.
Was that budgeted for this year, or is that you're going to have to find that?
Yeah, we had already planned to borrow and had budgeted $250,000 of that money for what was going to be called the Housing Incentive Program. We would take those monies, but beyond that, the other monies haven't been budgeted for. We're just really seeing ourselves, and I don't want to use an overarching word like crisis, that would be too far, but in a real pinch where people want to buy and build here and they just don't see lots of interest to them. And I think Josh said in his presentation, there's 200 single-family lots out there. Well, that sounds like a lot for a city of 20,000 until you look at where they are and the type of lots they are. And, they're scattered all over here and there. We really need a couple of subdivisions where people say, yeah, here's a 25 lot area. It's going to have some nicer homes. I want to be part of that. Can I buy there and build? More than just one here, one there, one behind this store and whatever. It's nice to have those lots, but it doesn't solve the problem.
Okay, and there's a 10-acre parcel somewhere. You're not ready to say where it is or what?
We don't. There is somebody we've been talking with. I can't speak to who and where, but it does seem like if this comes together, we've got a likelihood of making this happen. It's not that we think necessarily that the price is going to be driven up if we talk about it publicly, but we do have a location for this, it appears, that will fit really nicely for 20 plus homes. And we think this would be a huge step forward in terms of being able to attract people and companies to come to Marshfield.
Okay. Did you have anything on that one? Okay. Jump in anytime. That mic should work. The other big item then, Steve, on the agenda was compensation program overview. I know Alderman Fisher had asked for this, requesting basically an overview of the city's current compensation program, something that I think was looked at here just recently. I'm not sure what is the issue. The wage scales were all out of line or out of whack or something, or you were trying to bring them in line with industry standards, or I'm not sure what the issue was, but maybe just could you talk about the compensation program overview that the council heard last night and kind of maybe where that issue goes to from here?
Yeah, and again, I wasn't at the meeting, but Jennifer Rakew, our Human Resources Director, did a really nice job on her presentation. I saw a little bit of it last night when I came back from vacation, and the handout that I've got for you here walks through it. It's 9 slides, I think. Compensation theory is it's an art, not a science, and it's highly debated by people. When is it fair, when is it not? But we had a company called Carlson Detman did a study for us back in 2012, 2013. And we went in with other communities on that study. So it wasn't just us, it was other cities in Wisconsin. And it wasn't that the study was a bad study, but we didn't use it to its fullest. We really didn't make an effort to get people beyond market probably the way we should have. And again, what you want to do is you hire somebody and they start at, let's say, 90% of what they ought to make. And then they work here 3-4 years, whatever, and they proceed to improve, they become more proficient. Now they're where they ought to be. Well, if they're here 7, 8, 9, 10 years, they really ought to be higher than that. They ought to be at a place that represents the fact that they are very skilled, very effective, and efficient in their job. And we weren't getting people to that point. We really never got council buy-in for that, and we've had some financial challenges along the way. Well, in 2018, we adopted a new plan from a company called McGrath, working with us. They're out of Northern Illinois. And the idea was you start at, I think, 90% or so, 92.5% actually, in that area, and you work up, and eventually you can get up to over 110% of what's considered to be the average, the market for the position, with successful performance reviews and with increased proficiency. But again, that ran into the reality of the fact that we had financial challenges. You know, suddenly we have this TIF transfer thing, and we realize we've got a structural budget shortfall. And so the last couple of years, the council has not authorized an increase in the scale. So let's take an employee right now, and they're on step 2 of their scale out of 15, and they're fairly new. And, you know, they got an increase this year because they, you know, had a successful performance review. They're doing well. They get moved to step 3. But we've determined that that job is such that we need to keep up on what others are getting paid. So if the scale doesn't adjust for inflation or some version of it, yeah, they move up from step 2 to step 3, but maybe inflation was 1.5% or 2%. We're not really keeping the scales to where they belong, to where if you're an accountant or a building inspector, your range is moving along with your steps. So we kind of flagged it for the council and said, hey, look, it's year 3. In the last 2 years, it's been, you know, we haven't been getting the scale changes, and we understand why, but here's where that leads to. Here's the problems that raises. Do you really want to be back here in 23 or 24 talking about enlisting the services of a new firm to do another study for $25,000? And of course, the answer is no, we don't. We don't want to keep paying consultants. We want to adhere to the plan. And there's other challenges. In the police and fire area, for example, those are union salaries. So let's say every year, you know, we're giving the union 2.5%. Well, if the management, the chiefs, the lieutenants, the sergeants aren't getting those same level of pay increases, the gap gets smaller and smaller. We've got some positions now where someone says, hey, would you like to move up the ranks? Not really. I make basically the same as the person above me, and I don't have the headaches of being a manager. So I'll just keep being a firefighter. I'll just keep being a police officer rather than, you know, work to get to be a lieutenant and make a very small amount more. So that compression is starting to weigh on us in terms of trying to attract and incentivize people to take managerial positions in those 2 departments. So there's a whole host of things going on here. So what Jennifer was trying to lay out is, here's where we're at. It does appear we may be falling behind. I know Tom Witzel, one of our council members, was asking about how CPI compares to the last couple of years of increases, and it doesn't. We haven't kept up with the inflation rate. So they've asked us to come back with some more information and answer some of their questions and be working towards where we have some idea as we get closer to the budget process of what's acceptable, what types of increases are going to be acceptable to keep the employees moving forward and yet stay within our finances. I will say one more thing before you have any questions, though, and that is this. We are a service business. So, you know, people look at us and they'll say, I know I have friends who'll say, your personnel costs are high. My gosh, my company, the personnel costs are only 30% of our budget. Well, yeah, you make a product. You have big equipment. You have, you know, you make widgets, whatever. Who we are is what we do. It's the building inspector who comes out. It's the police officer who comes to your house. So we are a much higher percentage of our budget is for personnel costs. But that's why we need to tend to that. We need to make sure that we are keeping up. We've had a lot of turnover lately in our street department. People have said, you know what, I'm going to go work in the private sector. You know, the wages are not keeping up here at the city. We want to make sure we get and keep quality people.
Without breaking the bank.
Well, right. And you know, we had a tax rate increase last year of 7.4%. And that's not because of our salaries. That's because of some of the underfunding we've done in the past of our budgets. But the taxpayers look at us carefully and say, hey, look, you know, I didn't get a big raise at my company, and your taxes went up 7%. You know, what gives?
But yeah, right, because as people stay longer, you know, then they expect, you know, those increases.
They do.
So how do you know, manage that without, like I said, without raising taxes and so on and so forth? So
Yeah, it's true. And yet we have people who, you know, have got 15, 20 years experience, and they could go to any number of consulting firms and other companies and make more than they do here. And they like it here. I think we're a good employer. I think we we care about the people, but, we all look at our pocketbooks. And, we decide what's best for our families.
So the bottom line was, I guess I didn't notice that if it's in here, but what would is this a policy or a plan you're looking to implement? If so, I guess, I don't know, bottom line it for us in terms of what's the overall financial impact of this thing if you move forward with it? It's gonna cost us some money to make these adjustments?
Yeah, it is. And I think that's why we want to have this conversation apart from the budget process. You've been at our budget meetings, Mike, and, they're not always pretty. We had 4 of them last year. And, you have a lot of tough conversations over $500 here and $1,000 there. It's not a good time to come to the podium and say, you know what? I know we hadn't planned on this, but I'm asking for a 2.5% increase for the employees, and that's going to cost you $100,000 extra. What we want to do is, away from the budget process, on a night like last night, when there was really nothing big on the agenda really, to have a presentation, to have Q&A, get familiar with, here we're still behind neighboring cities. Our salaries are not keeping up with Point, Wausau, whatever. We're not asking you to give us more money tonight, but we are asking you to understand how the pay plan works. And, hopefully you're all bought in. If you have concerns with it, let's tweak it. But when we get to the fall, for example, and we're looking to ask for an increase in the scale, we don't want it to be new. We want it to be something where you think back to May and you think, yeah, I remember that conversation in May. And we really are starting to drift a little bit from that 2018 program we adopted. Let's keep on this.
And so last night, just to be clear, was not an action item, it was just a presentation?
It was. No, I'm considering bringing to the elected officials, something even before the budget process for an adjustment. But last night was simply a presentation with Q&A, a chance for the council to understand it. Now, I'm going to come back in 2 weeks on the 25th, and you're going to look at the agenda and you're going to say, compensation again, Steve? Are you serious? But that's a chance to address some of their questions, talk a little bit more about the plan. Do you have concerns about the plan? Now you've thought about it for a little while, you've looked at the charts. If so, let's talk about them. We can always look at slightly modifying the plan, but we want you to buy in. We want you to be with us so that when we talk about keeping up the scale to make sure that our employees are being treated fairly, it's not a new event every time. It's not like you've never heard this message. And that's important. And we want to make sure we're doing that.
Okay. Emily, you got anything? Anything else on that, Steve?
I don't think so. Compensation is one of those things, like I said, it's there's a lot of things that go into it. There's internal equity. You're the building inspector and he's the accountant, and wait a minute, I should make more than him. So you get those kind of comparisons. You have the external comparisons. How do we do compared to Rapids and Point and other cities? And then you have the whole idea about the private sector. And I don't think the private sector was talked about a lot last night. When we've done studies in the past, we've had a hard time getting private data because private companies don't have to give us information. So you can call and say, hey, company XYZ, what do you pay your accounting clerk? You're probably not going to get it. But it's important because it helps us determine whether we're paying fairly. So, we try to compare in every way we can, but all those types of comparisons, internal, external with public sector, external with private sector, it's a complex issue. And, every time the paycheck comes out every 2 weeks, people are like, is this fair? So it's an important issue, even if it's not one the public thinks about a lot.
Okay. And there was one closed session item that I noticed that had to do with, it says status of pending legal action with Haas Sons Incorporated. What can you tell me about that one, if anything?
Again, it wasn't here last night, but there was no action taken publicly on that. Periodically, we have a situation where, in fact, we had one, I think a year before, where we have a contractor and we have some kind of a dispute over work that was done, maybe some damage that occurred. And, you like to settle these without going to court. Nobody likes to go to court. You end up paying attorneys more. You roll the dice as to whether you win or lose. And I think what we have coming together here is an agreement that there may be a settlement where, one side agrees to pay the other a certain amount and we all call it a day. But like I said, there was no action taken in open session, so perhaps that dialogue is still going on how to resolve that one.
Okay. And just in terms of, I guess, not something that was on the agenda per se, but what are we, I don't know, are we settling into now for the summer or going into the fall? What, aside from housing, is it CIP?
Yeah.
What's next now? What's the next big thing for the city? Because we're kind of coming out of this 10, 11-month period of,
Yeah.
a lot of, turnover, turmoil, I guess you could say too. So now we're sort of getting into this period of where things are a little quieter. But what's the big thing happening right now in terms of budgeting?
Yeah, the CIP, the five-year capital improvement plan update, there's going to be a special meeting here in the council chambers on Thursday night, the 13th of May, and another one on the 27th of May, if I have the dates right. Yeah, and those will be, looking at the long-term capital spending for streets and other things. That's really important. It's a blueprint. It does change from year to year, but it's important in how we plan for those street improvements and facility upgrades. I'm going to go back to what you said, though. I think one of the big things that we're facing right now, uh, I think we all feel it here, is just getting back to normalcy. We've been through the police chief, the voluntary settlement with him. We've been through the mayor being removed from office. I mean, that's a huge thing as well. And I think we're just trying to get back to a sense of uh, just regular life and good government and focusing on the things that we need to. I think if you heard Adam Fisher last night, he made some pretty strong comments about the fact that the council feels like its hands have been tied for a long time in terms of speaking publicly, but he wanted people to know that they're just trying to do their very best, and they respect public input, but they also want to be treated the way people want them to be treated by the council. So I think he was trying to set the stage for let's move to the next level. I think one of our speakers before, Bill Panker, said something similar at a previous meeting. Let's get back to civility, teamwork, and moving the city ahead. We're anxious to talk about things like economic development and the new aquatic center. We really are. And that's not to bury those other issues, but I think there's a sense here we want to get back to what we normally do.
Yeah, go ahead.
Kind of along those lines, there was a press release between the mayor of Madison and the mayor of Brookfield. And they were saying, they want more money going to cities and villages from the state budget. I guess, do you have a position on that? I don't know if you've talked to that in a municipality kind of association or anything like that, but is anything along those lines?
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's a movement by the League of Wisconsin Municipalities and others to try and get increases in shared revenue payments to cities. What's happened is those payments have remained fairly flat over the years, and the cost of living hasn't. So, while they provided the same rough dollar amount, inflation has taken a toll. And it's that state aid that allows us to do much of what we do. It's really, after property taxes, state aid is the second biggest source of revenue we have. We get, almost $5 million in shared revenue alone, and then we get transportation aid, about $1.5 million, and some other dollars. Probably $7 million in total of our money comes from there. So we want them to keep up with helping cities do what they need to do. And now they're talking about eliminating the personal property tax. If they do, they've said that they'd provide an offset payment to cities and villages. And we're always a little bit skeptical because always we think, okay, you'll provide that offset at first, but what about the next legislature in 2023 or 2024? We're always concerned that that's going to be reduced. So, we just want their commitments to be honored to help cities do what we need to do at the local level.
So I'm glad you brought that up because didn't we talk a few years ago, Steve, about this? I forget what it's called, where basically when it comes to the state budget, you gotta spend more to make more or get more. We weren't meeting a certain threshold to get some certain funding or something, and it was sort of a backwards way of thinking.
Well,
Can't remember what it was called. But
it's called the Expenditure Restraint Program.
that's it.
And what it is if they set this percentage and they change it every year based upon inflation or whatever. They'll say, cities, if you keep your spending to no more than 1.1% over last year, you'll qualify for your share of a big pot in the following year. So you're doing your budget in 2021, and you get a budget approved for 2022 that holds the line on spending, and then you qualify for an expenditure restraint payment in 2023. But the oddity of it is, yeah, I mean, you may find yourself cutting expenses to get more money that you really needed the year that you cut expenses. It's kind of bizarre. But, for us, we get about $400,000 a year in expenditure restraint dollars. It's hard to give it up. It's hard to say, well, you know what? We need to spend money this year. We're not going to worry about what we get in 2023, because when that time comes, you've given away a big chunk. So I think it's a well-meaning plan. It just sometimes plays out kind of weird.
Okay.
And, if I can just say one more thing real quick. Everybody knows that the state and local finance system needs to be revisited. If you remember the Kettle Commission back many years ago, they looked at how dependent cities and villages are on property tax, how dependent we are on the state for what Madison gives us. But nobody really came up with or implemented a system that gets us out of this loop. So until further notice, we are tied to the to the property tax, which is hard because every year more and more properties come off the tax roll. They're bought by nonprofits or whatever, and the state continues to not keep up with shared revenue to cities and villages. So it seems like there's more of a squeeze every year. So I don't blame the state like some people do, but at some point, the way local government is financed needs to be revisited. It just does.
What is I'm just wondering now, what's the term, assessed value
Yeah.
of the city?
Total?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't have it memorized.
Oh, I thought you did.
It's in the 1.5 billion range.
That's
somewhere in
okay.
there. Yeah. For 1 minute, we get to use a word like they use in DC, billion, although the big word there is trillion now, of course, right?
Yeah, right.
But I think it's around 1.5 billion, the total value of all the property in the city of Marshall.
Huh. Okay. Yeah, it's all connected.
Yeah, and let me just really quickly, I mean, our budget outlook for 2022 is better than it's been the last 2 years, but it's still going to be tight. So we need all the assistance we can get from our legislators to meet their obligations.
So CIP requests are coming in now. That's basically where that's major capital projects. That's not that's not your annual budget. That's for the
No.
big ticket items. But those spending requests will be coming in too throughout the summer, right? And you kind of do both of them side by side all at once?
No, what happened is we solicited requests from all the department and division heads earlier this year. So they're in a finite document right now. And the council is going to consider them. They're going to say, look, you want to do this project in 2023 or this one in 2025, how are you paying for it? And there's tax levy, there's borrowing, there's grant funds, there's room tax funds for some of the parks and recreation projects. It's how would you fund these projects over the next 5 years? But a year from now, we might look at it and say, you know what? We thought the most important thing in 2024 was going to be redoing X Street. Well, now X Street looks pretty good compared to Y Street. So it's a document that changes from year to year. But it's a blueprint to how we can do the most important big ticket items in the next 5 years.
So any big ticket items for next year?
Yeah, but the reconstruction of 17th Street over by the fairgrounds is the big one.
Okay.
And that'll be a big deal. That'll be an improvement project that's been wanted for a long time for safety purposes over by the fairgrounds and just because that's a major street. Major is not a technical term, but it's a much used street. That's our biggest project for 2022.
Okay. All right. Do you have anything else? Okay, that's all I had. Steve, do you have anything else?
I'll just say it wasn't a really heavy agenda, but every once in a while it's nice to have these because they allow for presentations like the two you saw last night, the city subdivision and the compensation, where the council can concentrate and listen, knowing they're not going to be sitting here until 10 o'clock at night, afterwards. So you'll see busier agendas coming up.
Okay. All right.
That concludes our post-council meeting news conference for the meeting on Tuesday, May 11th. Thank you for joining us. And for Mike Warren and Emily Davies, who's here from Channel 7, we wish you a great day.